second segment, the economic diversification in Tobago. And I believe this is where we'll hear a little bit about the tourism sector. Let's go, Mr. Anthony Pierre and Mr. Bernard Mitchell. You'll go one after the next, and we'll have very brief question, if any at all, depending on what I have just said, because we are running behind time. So here we have first Mr. Pierre and secondly Mr. Mitchell. Your programs will tell you who they are.
Okay. Good morning. Allow me to recognize the Honorable Joel Jack, Secretary of Finance and Enterprise Development in the Tobago House of Assembly, and Mrs. Jack, Presiding Officer of the Tobago House of Assembly, Mr. Kevin Charles and Mrs. Charles, other Secretaries of the Tobago House of Assembly, Administrator in the Division of Finance and Enterprise Development, Mrs. Claire Davidson-Williams, and other administrators, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. The Tobago House of Assembly Venture Capital Equity Fund Limited was established in November of 2010 under the Venture Capital Act of 1994. It is one of the instruments that the THA has created to further develop and diversify the Tobago economy. The Venture Capital Company is charged to focus primarily on investments that support the diversification mandate guided by the overall clean, green, safe, and serene mantra. Sectors for investments are agriculture, agro-processing, alternative energy, tourism and hospitality, including a niche market in health tourism, biotechnology, and clean light manufacturing. The target fund size is 100 million TT dollars, of which the Tobago House of Assembly has contributed $25 million as seed capital. The drivers for the creation of the Venture Capital Fund are: 1, transformation of the Tobago's economic landscape through the encouraging of wider private sector participation in new and existing economic activities; 2, diversification of the Tobago's economy; 3, reduction of reliance on the THA as the main job provider on the island; and 4, reigniting the entrepreneurial spirit in Tobago. It is anticipated that the Venture Capital Company will play an integral role in the achievement of the goals and objectives contained in the Comprehensive Economic Development Plan for Tobago, which identifies 7 sectors as the main economic drivers of the Tobago economy. The role of the Venture Capital Company is that of a catalyst in the transformation process. The Venture Capital Company fills a vital financial gap in the existing ecosystem. The Tobago Enterprise Grant Program and the BDU Enterprise Assistance Loan Programs, as useful as they are simply not enough to fill the gap. Entrepreneurs and growing businesses are therefore sometimes forced to seek debt financing, which, as we all know, is not always readily available, sometimes carry onerous covenants, and with the unsustainable demands on the business's cash flows, which negatively impacts on growth potential and sniffs away much needed working capital. Venture capital is patient capital and can literally make the difference between success and failure of businesses, especially when combined with the other attributes of venture capitalism. A venture capital company is not a silent provider of equity. Venture capital companies become partners in their qualifying investee companies, acquiring equity, sitting on the board of directors, and most importantly, providing specialist business skills such as marketing skills, financial management skills. The interplay between having access to timely capital and profitable growth cannot be overemphasized. The identification and penetration of key target markets are also essential elements of the ecosystem. Businesses are built on the premise that there is an economic need in a target market which the entrepreneur thinks he can satisfy at a cost that is less than the amount the market is willing to pay for the satisfaction of that need. Put very simply, without markets, we have no business. There are three noteworthy market pillars that come immediately to mind for Tobago as we discuss diversification and expansion of the economy. One, CARICOM. Currently, CARICOM accounts for just about $1 billion worth of annual exports from the manufacturing sector in Trinidad and Tobago, and supports at least 30,000 manufacturing and sales jobs. Second pillar is tourism. The tourism sector has been the economic mainstay for Tobago for many years. Deepening and widening the tourism sector and creating and redefining, and in some cases refining new market niches can provide exponential growth and profitability well into the future, and will be a great source for potential portfolio companies for the venture capital company. And thirdly, E8CUT, the Cove Eco-Industrial Business Park, is Tobago's flagship diversification project and represents a significant plank in the venture capital potential deals flow of companies with a manufacturing platform and technology development based. I now turn my attention to two critical issues which need to be addressed frontally. The first issue is a question of a government-sponsored venture capital company. Why should the THA invest taxpayers' money in a venture capital company? Shouldn't venture capital be sponsored by the private sector? Why should public funds be given to private sector enterprises? These questions have been asked, and rightfully so. Let me answer the giving to private sector question first. An investment by the venture capital company does not constitute a gift to anyone. It is an investment, and the board of directors will do all in its legal power to protect that investment in the first instance and to secure a reasonable rate of return on the investment. The issue of whether the private sector should be sponsoring a venture capital company in Tobago can be dealt with from several angles, including but not limited to the fact that the scale and size of the Tobago economy will present a significant challenge to a real venture capitalist. But more significantly, the THA saw a developmental role for the venture capital company. This developmental role has given rise to the question as to whether the venture capital company is truly a venture capital fund or a development fund. My answer to the question is unequivocal. It is a venture capital fund with a developmental bias. And I ask the question, what is wrong with that approach? Allow me to read from an article written by one Claire Leonardi, CEO of Connecticut Innovations, a publicly funded venture capital company operating in Connecticut in the United States of America. And she wrote, Connecticut Innovations operates like any other venture capital company in that we invest on the same terms, are involved with the governance of our portfolio companies, of which there are currently about 100, and focus on returns. There are, however, some notable differences in our operations. For one, we will take on more risk than a typical venture capitalist, often investing at the earliest stages of a company. We also have what we refer to as a double bottom line, and I like this concept, a double bottom line. Instead of focusing solely on returns, we also consider the potential impact our investments will have on economic development and job creation in the state of Connecticut. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm proposing to you that this is the case of the Tobago's venture capital company. And finally, she said, unlike a typical venture capital fund, Connecticut Innovations funding does not have a shelf life. We are evergreen, meaning our investment funds come from our investment returns. If it was a private sector, those returns go back to the provider of capital by way of dividends. But being public, it stays within the fund, so the investment returns and through capital contributions from the state of Connecticut. Every year, we invest in new companies and make follow-on investments in our existing portfolio companies. Another case of state-sponsored venture capital company being used as a vehicle for achieving economic developmental goals can be found in New York, New York State Innovation Venture Capital Fund is a seed and early stage venture capital fund with $50 million to support and attract new high-growth businesses. The fund provides critical funding to promote the commercialization of new technologies, provides incentives for economic growth, and encourages job creation across New York State. And I ask the question again, so why not Tobago? Research suggests, however, that what is required is an effective structure that can deliver on the goals of the venture capital company. The more successful government-supported programs for venture capital funds have been those structured as public-private partnerships, where the government provides the capital, facilitates the venture capital company's operations, and maintains oversight, with responsibility for investment decisions being passed on to the private partner called a fund manager. To date, the Tobago House of Assembly Venture Capital Company has not appointed a fund manager, but we are currently engaged in a process with a consulting firm to advise and lead us in this process. We anticipate that the fund manager will be engaged before the end of the first quarter of 2016. The Tobago House of Assembly Venture Capital Portfolio investment currently stands at $4 million, comprising 3 qualifying investee companies, namely Andy's Sherry Nectar, Quad Rivers Woodworks, and Pork International Group, which the Chief Secretary made reference to earlier this morning. Of the 3 investee companies, 2 are tenants at the Cove Eco-Industrial Business Park. And collectively, when these companies are fully operational, will have provided 22 permanent direct jobs to Tobago. In the context of Tobago, that is significant when you consider that's a $4 million investment. Another major achievement of the venture capital company to date was the feasibility study for Tobago feed mill. We have all heard of the problems that Tobago farmers have had in terms of securing feed for their animals and their livestock. Well, the Tobago House of Assembly Venture Capital Company has completed a feasibility study on the working of a Tobago feed mill, and I am pleased to announce to this forum today that the Tobago feed mill is both technically feasible and commercially viable. Private sector involvement to participate in the establishment of the Tobago Feed Mill Company Limited will be invited in the first quarter of 2016. The investment committee, in conjunction with the selected fund manager, will seek to target between 3 to 5 investee companies per year for the next 3 years, which have sustainable competitive advantages, strong market positions, and significant potential for growth as the venture capital company moves to build on its existing portfolio. The targeted number of portfolio companies when the fund is fully invested will be 20 to 25 companies. Allow me to assure all stakeholders that the Tobago House of Assembly Venture Capital Company is committed to 1, promoting venture capital equity investments as alternative financing solution available to Tobago business operators. 2, increasing public awareness of venture capital funds and the benefits of venture capital and venture capitalism. 3, deepening the collaboration among financial and service intermediaries in Tobago. 4, providing a platform for the participation by international, regional, and diaspora communities in capital formation in Tobago. And 5, promoting Tobago as a growth pole in the economic development of Trinidad and Tobago. I trust that my presentation today, as brief as it was, adequately updated participants on the venture capital's role in the diversification drive of the Tobago House of Assembly. Mr. Secretary, let me assure you that your Board of Directors is committed to delivering on the company's mandate. To all present, please take the message with you. Tobago House of Assembly Venture Capital Equity Fund Limited is open for business. Before I end, it would be remiss of me not to recognize the pioneers of the Tobago House of Assembly Venture Capital Company and those who have contributed to its growth and development thus far. And so I pay tribute to the late Honorable Kenneth Varley, former government minister, and a man that I am proud to declare is and was one of my mentors. Dr. Edwin Carrington, former Secretary General of CARICOM, and Dr. Anselm London, former Secretary of Finance and Enterprise Development. When the proud history of Tobago venture capitalism is written, these three gentlemen will feature prominently. I also recognize Mr. Desmond Alfred, former chairman, and Mrs. Camille Robinson-Regis, former deputy chair, for their contributions in the formation and operations of the venture capital company to date. I thank you all for listening, and I wish you well for the rest of the day's proceedings. Thank you very much.